All right, thanks everyone for joining today. My name is Jim Crispino. I'm the Director of Developer Evangelism here at Genesys, and this is our monthly DevCast series, and I am proud to introduce you to a group of people from a new product offering that Genesys has called Genesys Cloud EX, and I will let them describe what that is and what it does and how to use it. Today I have Kathy Ann, Dan Stoops, and Cliff Bell here to speak with you on that topic. Before we hop into the discussion on Genesys Cloud EX, a couple of logistics. We'll try to keep a time at the end here, a 10-minute Q&A period for any questions you have. If you have a question, please use the Zoom Q&A feature, not the chat. It'll be easier for us to keep track on the Q&A. So please post your questions there and we will answer them either live or through the Q&A answer feature. And then obviously we're recording this. We upload all of these every month to our YouTube channel. You can find this series plus our other video series at developer.genesys.cloud/video. And I actually have a third slide for those of you who join often. We have a new slide this month. So just a shameless plug on next month's DevCast. We're going to be talking about how to use UUI data in SIP headers. I know you're all terribly excited about that topic. I'll be giving that next month toward the end of the month, and I'll make it as exciting as you can make UUI data. And then the last thing, if you have any topics that you would like us to discuss, we're going to open that up to you all to be able to suggest topics to us. So you can go to the tinyurl.com/devcast survey and fill out a survey there of what you'd like, or you can just email janessa.barrera@genesys.com. You'll be able to see this on the recordings if you go watch the YouTube video. You can get those two links to suggest future topics you would like to see, and we will be happy to present those. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Cliff Bell. And let me stop sharing, Cliff, and the screen will be yours.
Okay.
Awesome. That sounds fantastic. Well, while Dan brings up the screen that we're going to be presenting from across the presentation this morning, welcome. We're super excited about Genesys EX, and I know a number of you are here wondering what in the world is a Genesys EX and why would I want one? So I'm going to provide just a couple of initial comments right up front so that we can kind of get the lay of the land. Then I'll turn it over to Kathy Ann, and she'll talk a little bit about the importance of partners and the opportunity here for you. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time walking through the EX API and how it works and how you can use it. And that'll be Dan Stoops' part. So right up front, Genesys EX is Genesys Cloud without channels, or put another way, it would be Genesys Workforce Engagement Management standalone. What that means is that Genesys Cloud is going to accept data from other third-party contact centers, from other outside sources, to be able to do all of the employee engagement parts of Genesys Cloud, whether it's workforce scheduling, whether it's scheduling training, whether it's gamification, all the other rich features that are in Genesys Cloud that are not related to the customer communication channel. That's what Genesys EX is. It's all of WEM standalone so that you can use it with third-party systems. And the need that it meets is an opportunity for enterprises to begin using Genesys Cloud and Genesys WEM without needing to move all of their customer communication channels. So it's a different entry point for customers to be able to take advantage of Genesys Cloud and to start to realize the benefits of Genesys Cloud rather than moving all of their communication channels first. And there's a number of different customers that we've found that are in this situation where they're either locked in contract-wise, there's some other reason they can't move their channels and move all the way to full Genesys Cloud. And this is an opportunity for them to begin to take advantage of at least the employee engagement portions of Genesys Cloud. So the reason that we're doing this now is because it allows these businesses to begin to start to use these features in a way that is the best way for them to consume Genesys Cloud and begin to move into the benefits of Genesys Cloud. The big opportunity next for Genesys as it relates to EX is that we're able to accept data not just from contact centers, from third-party contact centers, but from other third-party systems that may be in the branch, they may be in a store, they may be related to some other employee data that you would like to use all of the scheduling and quality management and forecasting features of Genesys Cloud with a system that's not a contact center. And so that's where we see the future going. And you'll see, we'll point ahead just a little bit to the development of the EX API and the number of ways that Genesys Cloud is going to accept data going forward as well. So it's a really exciting area for Genesys. It's a really exciting opportunity for our partners as well, just in terms of the creativity and the ability to use Genesys in ways that we haven't necessarily done before. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to talk a little bit about the opportunity for partners and the importance of partner knowledge and creativity as we move into this area of the market.
Awesome. So as Cliff mentioned, right, how will this work, right? Connecting to that third-party system. So that's where you all come in. So we're looking for integrators, partners, or individuals or organizations that are willing to put in the effort to create this integration into Genesys Cloud EX to synchronize external third-party data from those relevant customer experience platforms of choice, right? So what Dan is showing on the screen is kind of a little bit of a diagram from our integration guide of the work that we're asking our integrators to complete. And so this is where a lot of our technical documentation will be updated. And Dan will take you through here in a little bit of what all of those details look like and how we can support you through the process. But currently, we have two integrators just working on the Avaya and the Amazon Connect integrator. So what that means is all of the other integrations, including Avaya and Amazon Connect as well, is open for you to also pursue. And so we're looking for integrators that are excited and are willing to kind of go to market with Genesys, with the Genesys Cloud EX integration. And so those integrations, as they proceed through the development and all of the support as from Genesys, will be sold as a premium app in the App Foundry, which will be sold by all Genesys internal and external sales folks. Right. And so there's a lot of opportunity out there for Genesys Cloud EX integrators. So we're looking for those interested to get started with us. So I'll share a link here if you're interested later on, once you read through some of the details that Dan will take us through. If you'd like to apply, go ahead and submit it. If you want to have a deeper conversation, you can also submit on there as well. And I'll get us kind of all together, talk about in detail some of the opportunities and where your interests are. So with that being said, I'll hand it over to Dan to take us through some of the details.
Awesome, great. Well, I am a developer here at Genesys, which is different than a Genesys developer. So a Genesys developer works on the core product and produces all the APIs and features that you see. I work on the other side, much like you as a partner or an integrator. I use all the Genesys APIs. And the way you can tell a difference between a Genesys developer and a developer at Genesys is that I'm actually on camera. Therefore, I'm a developer at Genesys. Genesys developers are hidden away. You're not allowed to see or talk to them. One of the first things I want to point out is, as Cliff had mentioned, is this is my admin screen of my Genesys EX org. So EX orgs and CX orgs are completely different orgs within Genesys Cloud. And everything you're going to see today is actually running in Genesys Cloud, the screens, all the kind of stuff. We're going to be doing all this live. But the reason I bring this up is just to kind of point out that what we see here on this admin screen are things like people, permissions, accounts, workforce management, all this stuff, shifts, trades, work plans, historical stuff, all these things. What you don't see are channels. You don't see messaging, you don't see routing, you can't purchase numbers, you can't do SMS, you can't do email, any of those things, because that's not part of EX. So if you're interested in pursuing this path, you need to get an EX org from Kathy and from Jim. You'll notice that EX org has no channels, but it does have integration points, and that's what we work against. So we go get an OAuth so we can use the APIs. We're going to push data into the EX org. We're going to see the results of all that. But again, really no channels, nothing to look at that way. Now I'm going to flip over to, this is what's a premium app, or basically a client app running in Genesys Cloud. This is one that we built as a team to show you how Genesys EX works from within a live app. So this is my Genesys EX org. Here I am over here as a person, and I'm going to kind of scroll down through this application and show you all the EX features one by one and give you an idea how EX works. Now, even if you're not into EX, this is kind of a neat introspection as to how Genesys works altogether. So Genesys CX is Genesys Cloud with channels, Genesys EX, Genesys Cloud without channels. But the way that we tell Genesys EX about activity is the same way that Genesys CX tells about activity. One of the neat things about Genesys Cloud is, you all know, it's an API-driven system. So essentially, when you as a developer are working with the EX organization, you're telling EX about a phone call, about an IVR, about an agent, about the presence. You're telling Genesys EX about these things in the same way that Genesys CX tells itself about those things. I know it's a lot of just EX, CX, what's the difference? But essentially you get to be the channel in the same way that Genesys Cloud CX is the channel. Right. Now, what I want to start out with is that this really starts from the top and works its way down. All of these, CXOs, CEOs, vice presidents within Genesys have made a commitment into Genesys EX. You might have seen some of the announcements. It's a big push for 2023. This is not a skunkworks project. This is part of the Genesys core set of values about what they're doing. And if we look a little deeper about what does it mean to be an EX org, an EX organization, as we say, is that we're actually pushing a lot of the responsibility from Genesys into the contact center that's using, like an Avaya contact center, or even a Genesys Engage or Amazon Connect, all these different decades of legacy systems out there. So the first thing that we do is we create a presence for that contact center. And it's really important because this presence says all of my information about my agents, their activity, now comes from this other source, which might, let's say, represent Avaya. So Genesys, don't pay attention to anything happening on the org. Like if I can't go here and change my state through the Genesys GUI, I change my state through Genesys EX. And so we create a presence that represents your contact center, let's say Avaya, and then we associate our system with that presence. So now we have a presence and we associate it. Now what you're going to see time and time again in all these examples, and I love to bring up these examples, is a bunch of GUIDs, GUID GUIDs. So agents are represented by their GUID. A presence is represented by their GUID. The agent status is represented by a GUID. And these GUIDs are set within collections of JSON. So JSON is the language by which we communicate. GUIDs are the way that we communicate about specific things. So you create a presence and you associate your agents and your activity with that presence. And now your contact center is feeding information into Genesys. And what are we trying to do? Well, if an agent in your contact center, say, goes online, you're going to send a JSON event to Genesys EX that says, hey, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, which is the event time, 9 o'clock in the morning. The event ID is your way of identifying that. This user, this particular agent, or this particular contact center, Avaya, has gone this particular presence ID. So Jim, I don't know if there's anything less exciting than SIP UUI data, but this is probably it. So next month you can point back to what I was showing and say, look, it's better than what Dan was showing, because Dan just showed a bunch of random characters.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so to set the bar right there, you could say, go back to that video and watch that. But each of these little GUIDs really do mean something. So this GUID here might mean agent online, right? This source ID might mean your Avaya system. And this user ID is a specific agent. And of course, this is a specific time. So it's pretty cool. Now, what's neat about the EX system compared to what Genesys is doing in the past is some of you as developers might have already been doing this. You might have already created your presence system for, say, Salesforce. So today, if you're doing a Salesforce integration, you can say that my agent's presence is based on their presence in Salesforce. And that's pretty cool. And this looks a lot like the way you would do that. But the big difference is the event date time. So what Genesys EX is saying is you can actually go back in time 7 days and say my agent came online Monday at 9 o'clock. Let's say today is Saturday evening, Saturday afternoon. You can say my agent came online Monday at 9 o'clock. They took their first call Monday at 9:01. They went for a break Monday 10:15. You can send all this information in historically, or essentially very much non-real time. And Genesys EX is just as happy with data that is 6 days old as data that is 6 seconds old. That's a big difference in the way Genesys Cloud CX does presence. So we prefer in Genesys EX for all this information to come in as near real time as possible, but it's not required. The advantage of real time or near real time would be compliance. So as Cliff was talking about, we're very excited about the agent, what they're doing, looking at their performance, but also compliance. So did they come online very close to the time they were supposed to? Did they take breaks when they were supposed to? So if you submit the data 6 days later, we can still give you compliance reports about your agents. But if you submit the data within 6 seconds or 600 milliseconds, then a supervisor who's watching the Genesys workforce management can see near real-time compliance of their agents because you're giving them near real-time compliance data. What happens invariably, though, is you've got a contact center way over there, probably way over there somewhere, and you've got Genesys Cloud EX, and sometimes those connections can be severed for no fault of your own. The internet goes down in the building, whatever happens. So what Genesys EX does is it allows you to go offline for 1 minute, 1 hour, even 1 day, collect all this information. And then when you come back online, when your connection between your contact center and the cloud is still available, when it comes back online, you can submit all this data. So near real time is very valuable, but if your connection goes down, just collect it all, and then submit it up. And Genesys EX would be just as happy to know all the activity about your agents.
Hey, Dan, can I interrupt you for a second?
Please.
We've had a couple of questions on the Q&A. I know you're talking, so you can't monitor that, but I think people are wondering if CX and EX can be used at the same time, or can you use these features in a CX org? Can you talk to that, please?
Yeah, let me give you a quick answer, then I'll hand it to Cliff for a larger answer. So today, as I speak, CX orgs and EX orgs are very different. So you cannot use them today at the same time. But that's not the long-term goal or even the short-term goal of Genesys, because Genesys EX and CX get closer together every release. And Cliff, I'll hand it to you for that.
Yeah, that was the answer. And it was funny because as Jim, as you were just starting and I was pushing the send button on the question from Robert there, the same answer, right? Right now they're separate. The goal going forward is to merge these so that you can use channels from Genesys, channels from a third-party system, and see them in concert together. But we're not there yet. So today they're completely independent. There's another question here. Could you use multiple CX systems for a single WFM to multiple orgs? Again, that's an area that we're also looking at. Same answer of a roadmap item, being able to use multiple third-party sources into that single EX org. And then I think there's a question here from Ian about an integration with Genesys Engage on-prem environment, and that is actually probably the first. That's probably the first GA connector that we'll have available to be able to serve the EX system. It's a good question.
Yeah, thanks for clearing that up. I didn't want to get too much further down because I think there was a
It's
lot
great.
of confusion about
the
distinction between the two, and can I use these today in my current CX organs? Thanks.
Yeah. And please do ask questions. I have been watching the number of participants. If it drops below 70, I'll just hand off to someone else to talk, because clearly I can't lose more than 10% of my audience before I have to stop. But so far I've been doing pretty good. It's been going up. And just to point out from Cliff's point, so take looking at an Avaya architecture, it looks something like this. You're paying attention to all the Avaya side and you're pushing it up to the EX side. And we did a simple integration with Zendesk, same thing. Zendesk has an API. We can pull the API about phone calls, push them up. And today, the EX organizations that I use are voice only. Digital is coming as a fast follower, but everything I'm talking today about is voice. And that brings up a good point about interactions and recordings. So these are kind of two halves of a coin. So one half is, what does an interaction look like? And an interaction is, again, this set of a JSON object. And think of an interaction as being, there's a beginning to an interaction and an end. If you look at the reports, it started at 9:05, it ended at 9:10. But within each interaction, there are these elements, we call these events, like an external established event is, when did the caller first reach Genesys? Went through the public telephone service and first reached Genesys. So what time did they first connect to Genesys? What's their name? What's their phone number? What do we know about them? Where did they come from? And when you send this event into Genesys, the Genesys EX says, oh, a call started. Awesome. Now, all these events are bookended. So if you establish an external event, which is someone called in, you have to terminate an external event. You have to end it. And if you're working with an EX org and you see a bunch of calls that never seem to end, what happens is that you haven't tied the two pieces together. You haven't both started a phone call and ended a phone call. And even within these interactions, if I wanted to show you more, what you would see is that an IVR starts at a certain time. The IVR started at 9:06, and the customer stayed in the IVR for, say, 2 minutes, and it ended at 9:08. And then they went into a queue at 9:08, and they stayed in queue for 30 seconds, and that ends. And then they went to an agent at 9:08:30, and they stuck with the agent for 3 minutes, and then that ended. So what you see in these JSON events are these pairs of, the customer started talking to us, the customer hung up. The IVR started talking, the IVR was done. The customer's in a queue, they came out of the queue, they're talking to an agent, they ended with the agent. And we're going to see a little later, I'll show you this, not just that, but what was the agent doing? So even though the agent stopped speaking to the customer, they may still be wrapping up the call with a wrap-up code. So how long did the agent spend wrapping up their call? Say 3 minutes. And so you'd ask, why is all this detail so important? Again, for compliance or understanding what your agents are doing, and for customers, how long did customers stay in queue? In other words, did we have enough agents? How long were they working with agents? Was that meeting our gamification targets? Was our agent speaking too long or too short? If you're trying to motivate your agents, you want to get that right. How long did the agent spend in wrap up? 1 minute, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. So all this data flows through into Genesys Cloud, into gamification, into the reports, and your agents can be looking at their, say, daily report of how they did against their metrics in Genesys EX, even though they're actually interacting with their contact center GUI, with their agent desktop, whatever that is. So WFM, WEM, gamification is all driven by all this data. Let me pause there, because Jim, if you see any questions, it's a good time to toss them in.
No, I think you're good, Dan.
Okay. Now down to 86 people. So now let's take a look at the recording side, though. So the interactions is kind of like the metadata. What happened with the recording is literally the recording of the caller and the agent. And so we want the entire audio file, or at least the audio that you have, right? So you could record at the trunk side. The minute the call comes in, let's say it comes in over SIP, we might want to fork that media stream and record the entire thing. And you're going to then submit to Genesys EX both this JSON object that fully describes what happened to this caller and this agent, and this audio record, which is fully recorded what happened between that customer and the agent. And if you talk about the value of Genesys WEM, like, what are you getting when you're paying for this? You get speech recognition, automatic speech recognition of all your recording. You're getting tagging, you're getting compliance, and our Genesys salespeople who describe WEM do a great job of saying, let's look at a recording. Let's look at compliance of this agent. Let's set up a coaching meeting with this agent because they failed to greet the customer correctly, or they failed to offer a particular product. So all of this coaching, compliance, and increased productivity of your contact center comes because we give every detail about that interaction, and we give the entire recording up to Genesys EX. All right. So what we're looking for, whether it be if you as an org yourself, you could, I'll just bring up Genesys Engage an example. You could look at your contact center and push this information in, or you can go with a partner to do that. But generally we see Genesys EX be sold hand in hand. You'll get an EX org, and then you'll get an integration to push the information from your contact center into that org. So kind of hand in hand, the Genesys org itself, then the integration which pushes in all the information. And to Kathy's point, if you want to learn more about that, this is the online API documentation on how to do recordings, to upload them into Genesys. The events, or what agents, are they online, are they communicating? All this information is described in this. And even some really subtle importance, like if you're doing recording, you have to encrypt it. Apple, with their iPhones, are really proud of the fact that messages are encrypted before they leave your iPhone. So if I'm sending a message to Jim, no one can see an unencrypted message, no matter how many points it hits along the way. It's encrypted on my iPhone, it gets to Jim, it's decrypted on his iPhone. Same thing going on here with Genesys. So if we take a look at the diagram, as an integrator, you're going to encrypt the audio file before you send it up to Genesys Cloud. You're going to send it up to an S3 storage, and then Genesys on the other side is going to decrypt it. So some really nice nuances about how these APIs are working to ensure that they're done correctly and privacy and all of that. All right. So Cliff and I like to say we work at the pleasure of Marian. Marian
Yep.
Taboy is the leader of this. Hey, Cliff,
Hey,
you want to
Dan,
throw
can
in
I
a
interrupt you?
message? Yeah.
I do, yeah. But before we do that, we have a raft of questions stacking up on recording. When you hit recording, and well, some people left, but some people really started sending in questions. So, so I think if we could knock off a few of these, that would probably be good. So one of the questions is, I think they mean EX, will EX be able to consume external audio directly or only through import? So that's question one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So should I go for what first question here? Yeah.
Yep.
So it accepts it directly in the sense that you do have to submit the recording. So it is not an endpoint streaming device. You can't just stream the audio to Genesys EX as a target, but the audio file as it sits on a disk somewhere in your world, as long as it's then converted into Opus format, which is kind of non-proprietary format. So convert the file into Opus format and you upload it through HTTP post to Genesys EX, which is to an S3 buckets. You just pop them up there, as many as you have.
Great.
Next question, please.
All right, perfect. So could you consume historical recordings for QA? Easy one.
Yes,
Yeah.
in the sense that historical is up to 7 days. So Genesys EX has a concept of history, much like my teenager, 7 days, and that's it. Beyond 7 days, now you're looking at WM standard import and scheduling and stuff. That's a whole different question. So we got a 7-day window. Great.
And the last question, it's a good one. Will recording storage use same fair use policies? And I assume that means same fair use policies as Genesys CX.
So I was actually reading about that yesterday, and because I saw the word fair use and I was so interested in that. So I believe the answer is yes, only because I actually saw the fair use. There's only so much storage that you have at each tier of Genesys. So you are just like, I think within CX, you are limited to the storage that your org level provides.
Awesome. I think that was it.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, that wasn't. There's another
Yeah.
one. Oh, that one got answered.
I answered that one, Cliff. Sorry. That was about audio hook. In case you were curious, somebody asked, could you use audio hook? You cannot, because Genesys is not the source of the audio in this case. We're the receiver of the end file. The contact center platform is the source of that audio. So you've got to get it from the contact center platform.
Yeah. That's right. And I'd like to point out that you're at 79 now, Dan. So I mean, I don't know what dances you know, or if you sing at all or anything like that, but
I'm not worried till it goes below the temperature. Right now it's only 44 here. So you guys are going to suffer quite a bit before it gets to that.
Right. Carry on.
And I do want to point out about recording is how important recording is. And if you're in the recording industry, you know how hard it is to get a hit recording. It's a lot of marketing, but the audio fidelity of the recording is going to influence speech recognition, compliance, everything. So we really want the best audio. Opus is not indicating like the bit rate. You want the best recording possible. Go to the source. You don't want it compressed and then have them uncompress it. And recording, we think of mono or stereo. So mono recording would be that the customer and the agent are both recorded on the same channel, and you have to kind of pick them apart. It's harder. Stereo recording is that the customer is in one channel and the agent is in a separate channel. And so we can, you know, listen to the agent's channel or listen to the customer's channel. So we could spend a half an hour on recording alone, but basically it's get the best quality you possibly can and get stereo, which is separating the customer track from the agent track if you can. And then send it up to Genesys EX. Then the magic happens. And that's why you get, so if you look at all of the things that Genesys EX has, like I say, you know, speech recognition, transcription, keyword spotting, all those kind of things, that's where you get the value of the whole Genesys EX solution.
If I can, maybe I can help clarify things a little bit, because it took me a while to understand what this is, what Genesys Cloud EX is and how it works. So if you think about Genesys Cloud CX, right? The contact center that we all know and love, the WEM portion of Genesys Cloud CX has been pulled apart. Right now, the contact center service in Genesys Cloud is calling all the APIs that Dan has mentioned so far, sending presence to our WEM platform, sending interactions, sending recordings. Like the contact center service is kind of standalone in Genesys Cloud CX and is sending all that information through the same APIs to our WEM service. What we've done is we've pulled that WEM service out to package it as a standalone thing. And we plan to have it compete against the WEM vendors that you all are probably aware of, NICE and Verint and all of those are standalone workforce engagement, workforce management platforms. And Genesys Cloud EX will be that. It's kind of like Ford makes a Mustang, right? Ford makes the Mustang. You can buy a Mustang. It's got an engine in it. It's got doors and everything. But if you can take the engine out, you can buy a Ford crate motor that is the Mustang engine, and you can put that in another car. You can use that in a car you want to build and have that Ford motor that powers the Mustang powering something else. That's kind of what we did with Genesys Cloud EX. We pulled WEM out, and it can run it can run with Genesys Engage, it can run with Five9, it can run with AWS Connect, it can use any of those other contact center platforms as the workforce management. There we go. That's my view of it. So
yeah,
well said.
And absolutely right. And so as a developer myself, it was a long trek for me to get to Jim where you are about how important WFO and WEM is. And just an example, when I was first developer with IVR, we had a phrase that we would play to the customer. If they made a mistake 3 times in a row, we would play the phrase, "I'm sorry, you're having difficulties, goodbye." Right? That's like the least empathetic thing I can think of. "I'm sorry, you're having difficulties, goodbye." And this is a complete turn, right? Now we're focusing on the fact that there are agents. We want our agents to be able to trade shifts. We would like them to be able to come in late but have coverage. When you really think about making the environment of your contact center the best for the agent possible, you want recordings of the agents. You want to coach the agents. You want them to have a mobile app where they can call in sick, and not have to just, trade a shift. So we're focusing completely on that. And a lot of times you don't see that because we don't talk about it. But the life of an agent can either be really nice because you're in a great contact center, or it can be hellish. And Cliff and I have tried that approach one time, and it really was just utterly stressful. No resources, no support, and that, we don't want that world. All right, and to Jim's point, what I'm coming through right now are the exact APIs that you can use to influence Genesys EX. And so the first API is to create your contact center, and you type in your name and description, and you hit this API. This is what I do with this button here, and we'll create a new contact center. We call it Cliff's Contact Center. And all of a sudden now that contact center exists as a GUID within Genesys. And then you add your agents to that contact center or to that presence. So what's important here is that agents don't naturally have an association with anything other than Genesys, but now I can associate these 4 agents with my contact center. So all their activity comes from that contact center's that's work. So we're going through the APIs one at a time here. And this is the API I kind of like to show, which is my agent right now is in a meal. I think Orange is a meal, and say I want to make myself available. Then I would just inject that and I can change my presence. Now, it's important that I do it on the right contact center. So for Stewart Communications Contact Center, I'm doing it right now, but I could go back 7 days if I wanted to, because we can go back in time. I'm going to make myself available and I'm going to inject that particular little JSON object, and it goes through and a little toast pops up. And here's the link. So I can go and take a look at my agent's status and see that I've changed to available. So what kind of goes hand in hand here is that you manipulate an API and then you go look in Genesys Cloud to see what was the impact of hitting that API. And the first thing we see is that I'm now green. That's pretty cool because green means I'm available. And I can take a look at my agent status and I can see for what is today, the 28th. I'll go to today and I'll see here that at 11:30 a.m. I became logged in. So kind of cool there. That's how I can test my present status and see that I'm green. I can change the routing status. This is really important because the present status has to do like, am I in training? Am I in a meeting? Am I in break? So if you're looking at forecasting all your agents so they can do all the activity they have to do to take their courses and all that, this is their presence. So how can I create a schedule that'll make sure that my presence are utilized, my agents are utilized correctly next week? But if I'm looking about what's happening with them on a moment-to-moment basis, are they actually interacting with the customer? Are they idle? Did they go not responding because they simply like walked away from their terminal? This is what's happening on a moment-to-moment basis. So we separate the two, agent forecasting versus agent activity, and I can inject that as well. When you push these buttons in the premium app, this is a .NET application, so you can see all the code where it calls the APIs, it constructs a JSON object, sends it in. So it's kind of, this is the working example of how to use Genesys EX. And this one is what I think is super cool. So, sorry, I guess that shows how old I am. I didn't know the phrase super cool. Jim, use super cool next week if you can, in regards to SIP routing. But here for Stewart Communications, for me as an agent, I'm going to make a call that lasts 13 minutes. I'm going to have it end right now. And I want to use a call that has a customer calling in. They went IVR, they went queue, and they spoke to me as an agent. So I'm going to inject that right here. And so it calls the APIs, it does the injection, and we're going to now see from the Genesys Cloud perspective, what does that look like? So when you send it in, it's this really big, long, messy JSON object that if you tie everything correctly together, you know, it'll be consumed by Genesys EX and then presented to a supervisor who is looking at this in these kind of reports. So there you go. So Dan Stoops as an agent was speaking to John Smith. I've got the time, all kind of 17 minutes, and I can take a look at the timeline and I can see, let me go to this one. Yeah. So I can see that the interaction took this much time. They spent this much time in the IVR. They actually spoke to the agent, but spoke to the queue. They kind of listened to music, and then they spoke to the agent. So it's kind of neat to see what these look like visually, as opposed to how you inject them. So again, your contact center is running, but when you inject all this information, then your supervisors and management and forecasters, they can all look at this in a nice free version of it. Let me pause there if there's any questions about that, because to me, this is like the highlight of the whole presentation.
Hey, Dan, we do have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Can we use Skim to provision users? The Genesys Cloud CX has the Skim, the SCIM API that lets like a human resource system push out new users to all line of business systems, right? So they can tell, hey, Genesys, we just hired Dan Stoops. Please provision him in Genesys Cloud, and Genesys will do that, right? Will EX support the SCIM APIs? I'm not sure if we do that.
Yeah, so let me give you an answer, which is if I scroll down here to the bottom, which is how do we create agents? So the APIs to create agents are independent of EX. I'm assuming that an API that's in CX is also available in EX. I'd have to go check to make sure, but the assumption is that it is. So it's not that in EX, you're not using any EX APIs to create agents as much as long as the agents are created into the EX GUI or whatever APIs exist. How do you normally create agents? That's super cool. The way the relationship tends to start is that you look at your contact center and you see that there are 500 agents in your contact center. Therefore, you call the Genesys APIs, the standard APIs, to create 500 agents in Genesys. And when you call those APIs, you're getting back 500 GUIDs, which is the agent identifier. So as long as you can tie those agent identifiers back into your integration, you're fine. When you create 500 agents, you need 500 identifiers, because whenever agent activity happens in your contact center, you've got to submit that activity based on the agent identifier. So I think the answer is yes, Jim, but I haven't checked it explicitly.
Yeah. I would hazard a guess. This is just a guess. I would hazard that the SCIM APIs are there and they're going to be used. Genesys Cloud EX, this one we're talking about here, runs on it. I mean, it is the infrastructure of Genesys Cloud CX. It just doesn't have the contact center services there. So my guess is that the SCIM APIs are there and function to provision users, as you would expect. But yeah, it's not something I personally have tested. We'll have to get a follow-up. So and shift swaps and time off and tempo access, just like all the stuff you would be used to in WEM with CX, are all still there with EX, right?
Right, and that's really the value of it. Is not only is it there, but you want your customer to be able to use all of that.
Right.
And what I'm showing here on the screen is that these are the standard Genesys APIs to create agents and queues and skills and languages and all that. So it's very important that your contact center, which is not Genesys CX, right? Because your contact center is Avaya or something like that. So you're looking at your Avaya center and you're saying, I've got 50 agents, I've got this many queues, I've got this many skills, and you're calling the Genesys APIs as they exist to create a replication of that contact center in EX. Essentially a duplication, you've got both there. And once you've got that created, the idea is that every activity that happens in your contact center is an EX call to have that activity represented in WFO, WM, everything within Genesys EX. All right. So it's kind of wrapping up. There's lots of examples here about how to create a scenario for your agent. If you want to kind of test that they came into the office and they went on queue for half an hour, then they were training. You can create these scenarios. You can submit them through this premium app into EX. It's just kind of a way to get a feel what things look like. If you haven't used Genesys WEM before and you just want to kind of play with it, you can use this app to do it. Same thing with routing, or to push in a bunch of phone calls. So Arthur took 5 phone calls this morning, and I'm going to pop them in there. But I do want to kind of dismount or finish this presentation based on recordings, because this screen here is really what's exciting about Genesys WEM, is that we've got the recording, we've got the quality summary, we've got the transcripts, all these kind of things. And so in this demonstration, in this premium app, what I tend to do is go grab an audio recording from a different org I have, a Genesys CX org. I just go and download it, a little error, just download a file. Let's say I've got a 5-minute phone call. And then I go through the steps of sending it to Genesys EX. We talked a little bit about encryption. You actually go to EX and you say, can I please have the key by which I should encrypt this recording? And you create a certificate to do the encryption. And then you encrypt the audio file. So however long it is, it's now encrypted in a way that Genesys Cloud EX can decrypt it. And as you know, Genesys Cloud relies heavily on AWS services and S3 buckets, and a lot of this is all tied together in that. But basically, you get the key, you encrypt it, and then this is really important, which is you attach the metadata to that file, zip it together, so that when Genesys Cloud gets this audio recording, it goes, oh, okay, I know exactly what interaction this is in regards to. Because most likely, through JSON objects, you've created this interaction by calling all the EX APIs. So you've created an interaction at the data level within Genesys EX. And now you're associating with that interaction the audio file for Genesys EX. So this is a mono audio file that is in Opus that's been zipped up for this interaction. And this is actually a key little point here. The communication ID, remember I talked about how an IVR starts and IVR stops, a queue starts, a queue stops, the agent starts talking, the agent stops. So the communication ID is really saying what portion of this interaction have we recorded? If you have recorded the very beginning, that's when the customer is first called in and the customer hangs up, this communication ID represents the entire length of the customer. But you could record only the agent side of the conversation, only the agent portion. This communication ID will represent the time the agent started talking to when the agent finished talking. So it's tying it all together. And then you HTTP put this up into Genesys EX, and it is now going to sit in the S3 bucket. And you can go in and look at the results of all that. So I could see that I uploaded 10 audio files, they're accepted correctly. I can kind of get the verification that all works. So recording, just can't stress how important recording is, really set us apart from any other solution. And there are other questions that come up like rate limits and stuff like that and how you do that. So we kind of have ways to answer all that. But Jim, I want to stop here while we still have a chance to answer your other questions and let you kind of wrap up the meeting and see if Cliff wants to add anything.
Yeah. So, hey, Dan, somebody asked early on, can you have two sources feed into Genesys Cloud EX?
Mm-hmm.
You can, I assume you can create two contact center instances, right? And have users from both for each, and you just inject to the appropriate agents for each system, right?
So the answer is technically yes. Right now we have a limitation, I believe, of one presence, but that's a temporary limitation. So today you kind of are limited to one, even though you can create multiple ones. And Cliff, I don't know if we have a better answer for the future on multiple contact centers.
Yeah, I think that the target is the second half of the year to be able to merge those in a supported way. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have to create everything via the APIs, or can you use the Genesys Cloud EX admin interface to create users and queues and skills and the layout, right? All the definition.
Yeah, you can definitely use the Genesys Cloud GUI for everything. And the key then, though, is that you have to get those GUIDs back to your integration. So we tend to do it programmatically just because if you have 50 agents in your contact center and you create them by hand, you have to then copy those 50 GUIDs over to the contact center. If you do it through the API, the GUID is kind of what comes back. But to answer your question, I actually use the Genesys GUI to do a lot of my work, and then I just copy and paste the results.
Okay. And then once a contact center system injects a recording into Genesys Cloud, we're going to create a transcription and topics and sentiment analysis based on that recording. Everything that WEM in CX does today, we're going to do with that third-party contact center system once we have the recording, but we can't do it without that.
Absolutely. Now you do have to go set up those things in your WIM system. What are you looking for? What are you tagging, right? So you have to do the setup, but all happens automatically in the background.
Okay. And is EX live? I believe it is, correct?
It is.
I'll go to Cliff, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. All
yeah,
right.
It's live.
So it's GA already. All right. Very good.
And like many things, Genesys Cloud, that API is going to continue to mature and expand, right? Over the course of the year, there's a number of different things that are planned and that are coming. So
we've had a couple people ask for the PowerPoint slides. It's not really a PowerPoint. So Dan is very proud. He came, I'm not showing slides during this. But Dan, you wrote a really cool app. It is not a premium app. I'm assuming this is a custom client app that you created and you've set the URL. Is that URL something that you're sharing, or is that your own private thing? I think people would be interested in what you have here.
Yeah, it's very sensitive in that the app comes up and first wants to log into Genesys. So since if you go to it without a login, it wouldn't know what to do. So let's talk about the best way to share this, because I'm excited that anyone wants to see it at all. It's like looking at old pictures and someone going, really? I want that.
Yeah. So for those of you thinking about it, Dan is authenticating the logged in user and he's using an OAuth client. And since that's not a premium like a public OAuth client, it's not easy for him to share this. He uses this to give presentations on EX. So this is his own thing. But I will talk to Dan offline. We'll figure out a way that we can maybe expose this publicly, that you guys could install this as an app and play around with EX based on his presentation here.
Yeah, and maybe one other quick answer there too, Jim, is for those of you who are interested in provisioning an EX org and building out a connector or an integration for EX, then this is an app that we're happy to put inside your EX org so that you can ramp up the exploration a little bit faster as well.
Yeah, that's really the goal is that speed.
All right, and then the last thing I have, and I'm actually surprised I can't even find this, is what's the pricing look like? I don't think the Genesys Cloud or the Genesys website has been updated for EX yet. Although it is GA, it's kind of probably by invitation GA. It's not.
That's right.
You can't just go and order it today necessarily unless you talk to your account executive.
That's right. Yep, that's exactly right. And all the quoting mechanisms, all the provisioning mechanisms, everything else are there in the background. I think that the pricing is supposed to go live next month in the pricing page there. So
okay. All right, and that clears out the questions. We've got a few minutes left. If anybody has a final question they want to ask Dan or Cliff, please post that in. Guys, thanks for the presentation. EX is really an exciting offering from Genesys. It seems kind of odd to me that a contact center platform vendor would create an offering that would work with other contact center platforms. But at the same time, there's definitely a market. We're very proud of our workforce engagement platform as it is, as a standalone offering. We think it can compete well in the market, especially as we roll out more and more features and support more and more channels on it. We should be able to hold our own in the workforce engagement market out there. So we're very proud of it.
And just to add to that, so Cliff and I live and breathe this now. And one of the things we're using that's really fun is gamification. So the idea that you can present to your agents a presentation, not just of what their goals are, but how they're doing against that. And even gamification, external metrics. So if you have values that are coming from for other reasons, like we have a quality survey that when a survey happens and an agent gets a really good result on a survey, you can present that to them in gamification. So it's a brave new world to look at the agent side of things, empathize with being an agent, want them to have the tools like the mobile apps so that they can trade schedules and trade shifts. And I think we've all kind of learned in the last few years with the pandemic, the more flexible you can be with your workforce, the more likely they are to enjoy working for you as a company. And I've certainly seen that within Genesys, just being a Genesys employee with, that just it's huge. So I just would really implore you all to look at WIM, look at the features of WIM, some advanced features of all this stuff, and see how it could really make your contact center agents happy.
Hey, Dan, last one, and then we'll wrap, maybe the last two, and then we'll wrap up. With the API rate limit, is the real-time adherence view available in EX? I I'm guessing real-time adherence view means going to the performance menu and looking at the dashboards.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. It was an anonymous attendee. I don't know who asked that question, but I'm not sure what API rate limit you're talking about and why you're concerned in the real-time adherence. But yes, we do have rate limits on the injection, right? But we do, we process those real time. The performance dashboard should work just the same way they work with Genesys Cloud CX. You should be able to see in real time the queues, calls in queue, average handle time, wait time, who's on queue, what their presence is in queue, and like everything you're used to in the performance dashboards should work. It just isn't working with the Genesys Cloud Contact Center service. It's working with a third-party contact center platform.
And to that point, when I did integration with Zendesk, I looked at the Zendesk call object. So it's a single object for that phone call. But in that object, it had how long was the customer talking, how long were they in queue, how long were they speaking to an agent, how long. So all that information was in their call object. Then I just had to tease it out and then send it into Genesys so I could see it in the Genesys displays.
All right. And then somebody appreciated your automagically term, wanted to know if that was an official term that Genesys uses. And
no, Genesys developers don't use that, but developers at Genesys use it a lot. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. All right. With that, everyone, again, thanks, Cliff and Dan. And sorry, Kathy Ann could not stay on with us, but she had to drop off. But we appreciate your time today. And everybody, join us next week for the exciting topic of UUI, or next month of UUI data with Genesys Cloud. All right. Take care, y'all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.